In the last class, we have tried to understand about the Coelenterates, where we have studied some of the very good examples like Hydra, Obelia, Physalia. Then even we have studied Aurelia and all. And today we are move on to the next class. That's the class Anthozoa. So we have already completed our discussion on the other two this thing. 1 minute, I will continue. Uh, so today we will move on to the next class, that is Anthozoa. So these Anthozoans are the most famous cnidarians for the very simple reason that they are having the corals. Even they build great reefs, especially in the tropical waters. Um, Along with these corals, they have very beautiful creatures like sea anemones, sea fans, sea pens, and uh, even if you look into the fossil records that is available, that dates back at least 550 million years back. The oldest anthozoan that we got, probably 550 million years back. Some at that time, some polyp-like creature must have been formed, and sea pen-like fossil. And even tens of millions of years later, in the Cambrian period, first mineralized corals appeared. So, especially the origin of these corals date back to the evolution of first dinosaurs. So, this is the beautiful representation of the members of this class Anthozoa. Uh, that you can see the corals, sea fans, sea pens, and every beautiful organism. So, they are variety of animals, and that have polyps, and the polyps are also usually flower like in appearance, so that's why they have become very very beautiful, and they have a large gastrovascular cavity compared to any other cylinders. So that is so large that the entire gastrovascular cavity is being divided into number of walls or septa, which arises at the infolding of the body wall. Body wall folds and make compartments by the formation of walls or septa. Uh, these folds, along with the mouth and pharynx, they are all arranged in a biradial symmetry. So these are having the sea fans, sea pens, corals, and all of them are the carnivorous polyps. That is, they feed on other organisms ranging up to 200 millimeter in length. They tend to be brightly colored organisms are found in this class Anthozoa, and mostly they are more predominant in the warm water, that is in the tropical oceans and seas. They feed on fishes, usually with the help of the nematocyst in their tentacles. Um, then even these organisms are also known to have symbiosis. Symbiosis means it's a mutual association with some other organism, especially it is with some algae. And the members of Anthozoan is clearly seen, and it is an established fact that most of these members of this Anthozoa, they exhibit symbiosis, that the mutualism with the algae. And even not only algae, even there are many fishes also live in the within the tentacles of the large anemones. But till now it is not clear how these fishes avoid the toxic sting of the nematocyst. So many kinds of corals are included here, starting from reef building species and mostly the calcareous one. Some anemone corals inhabit this symbiotic algae called zooxanthella. Even the photosynthetic algae are essential for these corals. So that's why most of the members of this Anthozoa, they are not deep water organisms. They are mostly seen in the shallow water because they need the light penetration. They are all carnivorous organisms. Usually, they catch the prey when it drifts in the water through their tentacles. Contact with the any organism discharges the stinging nematocyst, which will paralyze the prey. Then the tentacles will pull that prey and ingest that into the gastrovascular cavity through mouth. Once the food enters into the gastrovascular cavity, the gastrodermis cells secrete lot of digestive enzymes, which helps in breaking down the food and digesting them. Uh, Whatever the waste, that is the undigested food material is there, that has been ejected through the mouth with the sharp contraction of the body. Body contracts and expels that outside. This is the now. Let's try to understand about some of the examples. The first one is the sea anemone. These are the beautiful photographs of many of the sea anemones, and here there is one hand-drawn sketch uh, that is the showing different parts of the sea anemone. Sea anemones are attached to some substratum by means of this pedal disc. At the other end, it has an opening, what is called as mouth, which has been surrounded by the tentacles. There's an oral disc, and surrounding that there are tentacles. In the tentacles, you can see the nematocysts. So this is how it looks like a small barrel-like thing. This is the gastrovascular cavity, which you can see is divided because of the formation of the septa or walls. Uh, it has a very long and wide pharynx also. So here is the mouth, and mouth is surrounded by oral disc and then tentacles with the stinging nematocyst. This is how the sea anemones, which also known as metridium, appears. Uh, Sea anemones, many times they look like flowers because of their uh, brightly colored tentacles. But they are predatory animals, remember. And these invertebrates, they do not have skeleton at all. Either endoskeleton or exoskeleton, both of them are uh, absent here. And they live attached to some firm objects in the sea, usually seafloor, rock, or even they may attach to some other coral. It has been also observed that though they are attached with the help of their pedal disc, they can slide around very slowly. The pedal disc itself helps as the muscular foot by means of which they can crawl or move very slowly. See, these are the sea anemones, one form, and in between that you can see fishes also. But as I have told you, till now it is not clear how these fishes avoid the contact of these nematocysts. Beautiful flower-like things. They can reproduce sexually with egg and sperm, um, where they produce both the male and female gametes, and fertilization of these male and female gametes results in the formation of a zygote, and a zygote metamorphoses into an adult. Even they can reproduce asexually by lateral fusion with no medusae phase. Uh, there are more than 1,000 species of this uh, sea anemone in the coastal waters worldwide. Especially, mostly they are found in the shallow waters. There are few which are not showing any symbiotic association. They are seen in the deep ocean. Usually, they grow to a height of 1 to 4 inches, that is 2.5 to 10 centimeters across. But some of, there are few which can grow even up to 1.8 meters. See, this is the pedal disc which you can see here, and then the column, and at the turn here is the mouth. Mouth is surrounded by circlet of tentacles. So when you view this from the top, it looks like a flower. I already told you these sea anemones are carnivores. That they eat on fishes, mussels, zooplanktons like copepods, small crustaceans, tiny marine larvae, and other worms. They catch the food with the help of their tentacles. Uh, Generally, the tentacles are armed with poisonous stingers, what you call nematocysts, and uh, they paralyze the prey and then they feed on them. Even some of the sea anemones show symbiotic relationship. There is one particular fish known as clownfish. Always they live near the anemone. It has been observed that these clownfishes are immune to the stinging tentacles. Even the tentacles bite them, sting them also, nothing happens because they some clownfishes have shown immunity toward this nematocyst. Uh, Now, what is the mutual association here? The clownfishes are very well protected because of the nematocyst of the tentacles. In case of the sea anemone, no other predators would dare to attack on these clownfishes. So they clownfishes are protected by the nematocyst of the uh, sea anemones. On the other hand, these clownfishes help the sea anemone by cleaning the tentacles because the fish eats on the detritus material that um, also, and it cleans that one, whatever the algae and other thing grows on the tentacles, that has been cleaned by these clownfishes. So this is a very good symbiotic association where the fish is protected from the predator, and for the sea anemone, the fish clean their tentacles. See, this is how the clownfishes are seen in between the sea anemone tentacles. Even it has been seen that sometimes even the hermit crab attaches to a sea anemone, uh, especially uh, to their shells for camouflage. Sea anemone, uh, hermit crabs sometimes attach sea anemone to their shell. Hermit crabs have shells, and on the shell, the sea anemone attaches. So as a result, what has happened? The hermit crab is camouflaged, not seen because on the top there are sea anemones. Uh, on the other hand, the sea anemone exposed to more food because the sea anemones on its own they cannot move generally, but when they get attached to the hermit crab shell, wherever the hermit crab moves, along with that the sea anemone also moves. So as a result of which the sea anemones are exposed to more food by moving around. Even there are certain predators for sea anemones also. Generally, the sea anemones are eaten by a very few animals because of the tentacles and the nematocyst. But there is one particular common slug known as gray sea slug, and there's also one more, that is tompot blenny. These are the two animals which feed on even on this. This is tompot blenny. This is the gray sea slug. These are the two major predators for this sea animal. Then another example for the same class is the sea pen. Yeah. There are about 300 species of sea pen belonging to order Penatulaceae. These are colonial vertebrates. They are invertebrates. They are colonial invertebrates. Marine animal, of course, belonging to the class Anthozoa. Uh, why they are called as sea pens? The name is derived from their resemblance with quill pens. You may be knowing in olden days, the people used to write using the quill pen. The quill of some birds are collected and it was sharpened, and they used to dip that in the ink and write. Derived from the resemblance with the quill pen. They look like quill pen, so that's why as they are seen in the sea, they are known as sea pens. Especially they are occur in the shallow and deep water from polar seas to tropic. In the sense they have a most worldwide distribution from polar region to the tropical waters. See how it appears. Sea pens. It looks like a quill pen. Uh, the central stalk of the animal consists of a lower part, a peduncle, which anchors. So this is the peduncle, uh, which helps in anchoring. It gets buried in the sand or mud, and the upper part, that is known as rakish. This part, upper part, it is known as rakish. This is the peduncle which is buried. This is the peduncle, and this entire upper part we call it as rakish, and that bears the polyps. On this you can see the polyp. Each one is a polyp. Each one is a polyp here, and polyps are born on either side like the feathers. And the central stalk is known as primary or axial polyp, and so this is the central stalk or axillary polyp, and the sideways they are known as the secondary polyps. Uh, there are some which bear only few polyps. For as Chaunella bears few polyps, but there are some sea pens which bear as many as 35,000 secondary polyps. Um, the mouth and tentacles of the primary polyp, if they generate, uh, then consisting of little more than fleshy stem, strengthened by central horny rod. Actually, there's a central horny rod. This is the central horny rod which support them. See, these are all, this is the main polyp, and these are all axillary or secondary polyps. Each one is a polyp here. This is the central primary polyp. Even the very interesting feature of the sea pen is they can deflate or expand. They can shrink or expand by expelling or taking water inside through interconnecting hollow canals of polyps. These polyps are having some hollow canals. By taking water in that, they can inflate or expand, and even they can deflate or uh, shrink. Um, Especially the sea pens feed on small organisms captured by the tentacle, which are found at the end of the each polyp. Another very interesting feature is the most of the sea pens are luminescence. That means they show bioluminescence or they glow, especially when they are touched or disturbed. Even otherwise, when they are stimulated, they show bioluminescence. They will glow. See, this is one another photograph of a sea pen. As I have told you, sea pens have two types of polyps. One is the main primary polyp, the stalk, and the secondary polyps are numerous. In the secondary polyps, there are two types. One is siphonozoids and another one is the autozoids. These siphonozoids are meant to draw the water current through the colony. Inside the colony, there is a canal system. Through that, the water can circulate. So for that, the siphonozoites draw the water. And another one, the autozoites, they are feeding polyps and reproducing polyps. They feed and produce the eggs and sperms. That means the autozoites are concerned with both nutrition as well as reproduction. Then, uh, when they produce the eggs and sperms, these gametes are expelled through the mouth into the open water. So the fertilization happens in the open water. Once the fertilization takes place, the zygote develops into a larva, a ciliated larva, larva having number of cilia, that is known as planula larva, which is a free swimming larva. It swims freely in the marine water for few hours, then settle to the bottom. When they settle at the bottom, this metamorphose to form an axial polyp. That's the main polyp or primary polyp of a new colony. The central one is the axial polyp. This is the rod shaped structure. This is the primary polyp or the axillary polyps. Uh, this uh, After studying this sea pen, let's move on to another beautiful anthozoa, that is the corals. So these corals are ancient animals. Mostly they are related to jellyfishes, which you have already studied, and anemones. An individual coral, if you take, it is known as polyp. These corals are very small and simple organisms. They are very small and simple organisms, but they form colonies. So as a result of that, they become very big. Otherwise, individual coral, what you call polyp, if you take, they are very small. Mostly simple organ, mostly consisting of stomach, which has been topped by a tentacle bearing mouth bearing tentacles and stomach, and especially the polyps extend their tentacles at night to sting and ingest tiny organisms, especially the planktons, other small creatures. Uh, but they are very beautiful. So here you can see the individual corals and polyps. Uh, they have formed the colonies. And when the corals form the colonies, we call it as coral reefs. Actually, the coral reefs in the ocean, they are considered as rainforests of the sea. Why they are called as rainforest of the sea means, uh, you know, on the land, one can see the maximum biodiversity in the rainforest, evergreen rainforest. But in the ocean, the same great diversity of creatures is seen in the coral reefs. So that's why the coral reefs are compared to the rainforests of the sea. And corals are brightly colored or blend colored. Most of the time, the coloration is not because of the coral, but the microscopic alga in the coral tissues. Uh, Many of these corals have symbiotic association with the algae. Different algae take shelter in the coral tissues itself and imparts different colors to the corals. See, this is another different types of corals. This is the star coral, this is the brain coral, like that. There are different types. The uniqueness of these corals is the corals make calcium carbonate skeleton. They are hard because they form calcium carbonate skeleton that looks similar to the rock, Mostly it looks like a very rocky area in the ocean and have a symbiotic relationship with plant-like cells called zooxanthella. This zooxanthella enters the tissues of the corals, and zooxanthella is also having uh, chlorophyll molecules. They live in the soft tissues of the coral polyp and they use the sunlight to produce the food by the process of photosynthesis. And thus it creates a byproduct, and that byproduct can be used by the coral as a food. So that's why by having this zooxanthella algae in the tissues, the corals get the food because this zooxanthella, because of the chlorophyll molecule they possess, that undertakes photosynthesis, and the byproduct of this photosynthesis is the food for these corals. So zooxanthella provide corals with food. In return, the coral provides zooxanthella shelter and nutrients. The zooxanthella gets the shelter and even the nutrients from these corals. See, these are the different types of corals. But these corals do not develop everywhere. In order for the development of the coral, certain conditions, preconditions are there. Especially the large coral reefs are found only in the tropics. That means it requires some warm water. Why they are found more in the warm water is it is in the warm water it is easier to precipitate calcium carbonate, which is the major material ingredient for their exoskeleton. Then the secretion of these carbonates is supplemented by some microscopic cells of algae that lives in the tissues of reef builders. So when the calcium carbonate secretion is going on, it is also facilitated by the algal cells. This algae remove the carbon dioxide from the tissues and thereby bringing down the acidity of the water. So this is another beautiful photograph of a coral. Very fascinating creatures. Apart from the food that it derives from the algae, which is in symbiotic association, corals also capture the food. Especially during the night, they stretch out their tentacles, stinging tentacles, and they catch microscopic organisms that generally floats in the water and digest them within their stomach. So thus the corals can get the food by two ways. One is through zooxanthella, that is the symbiotic algae, which produce the food by the process what is known as photosynthesis. And another one is the corals, they themselves during the night swing their tentacle and catch the food. It has been seen that the corals grow, especially in the shallow warm water, and water should be very clear so that plenty of light should fall on them because it also having zooxanthella, which can undertake the photosynthesis. For that, it requires sunlight. So they are mostly found in the region where, in the shallow water region, where sunlight can easily penetrate. Um, There are many places in the world where you can see beautiful coral reefs, especially in the Pacific Ocean, uh, Indian Ocean, Caribbean Sea, Red Sea, Arabian Gulf, and in many places wherever there's a warm water circulation is there, you can expect them. But there are a few species which can survive or tolerate cooler and deeper waters. Even there are few species uh, which tolerate cooler water as well as the deeper water. But however, most of the corals prefer the warmest temperature, usually in between 85 degree Fahrenheit to or 25 degree Celsius in and around. This means that even the slight increase in the ocean temperature can harm the corals. The corals are very, very heat sensitive. If there's an increase in the temperature of the water by 1 or 2 degree Fahrenheit, they can sense it, and uh, most of the time this sense of increase in temperature decides the fate of these coral reefs. If the temperature increases, what happens is uh, the chlorella or xanthella, which is in the tissues of the coral, they die. When they die, the corals get bleached because color to the coral was barely because of this algae. Another photograph of a coral. Uh, Hard corals, they build a skeleton which are made of calcium carbonate. For this, the coral polyps has to secrete a layer upon layer of calcium carbonate underneath the body. Um, as the time goes by, the skeleton grows larger and larger, and uh, polyps will live on the outside edge. How long the polyps can build strong exoskeleton? It all depends upon getting the right building material from the water. And if it is available, they can grow without any check. See, this is how the coral reefs are growing. So these are some of the photographs of the corals. Especially the reef building corals are hard corals because their endoskeleton, their skeleton, which is made up of calcium carbonate, support for the coral as well as other organisms. Whereas the soft coral, they do not build calcium carbonate skeleton. Instead, they have a spine on them, and they are not considered as reef builders. Reef builders, which build the coral reefs, they are the hard corals. Soft corals do not participate in that. When hundreds of thousands of coral polyps build their skeleton close together, um, they create a calcium carbonate structure that provides habitat and food for variety of organisms. That's why the coral reefs are considered as the rainforests of the ocean. See, this is a green coral, but coral as such doesn't have any color, but it is having many uh, photosynthetic algae in them. They are green in color because of what you call the chlorophyll molecule. This is another photograph of the coral. So these are the examples for the coelenterates. Now we should know a little bit about the coral reefs also. These coral reefs are built from the remains of stony corals, especially the hard corals. Reefs are nothing but the remains of stony or hard corals. It has been observed and inventorized. The reefs cover about 1 lakh square miles of the world's shallow marine region is covered by these corals. Though in the temperate region some corals are found, the richness of the corals is found mainly in the region where there is shallow water as well as the tropical climate. The growth of this coral is gradual and continuous. As the organisms they form their living surfaces and multiply, spread and die, then their limestone, that is the calcium carbonate material from the skeleton, enters the reef. So there are basically three types of reefs which has been proposed by Charles Darwin only. There are three main types. One is the fringing reef, second one is the barrier reef, and the third one is the atoll. There are two other different forms, patch reefs and bank reefs. Now let's try to know the first these three. That's the fringing, barrier reef, and the atoll. Fringing reefs occur adjacent to the land with a very little or no separation from the shore. It appears as if they have attached to the shores. Uh, they develop through upward growth of reef forming corals, especially in the continental shelf. Continental shelf is the sharp increase in the depth. If you come to India, we have completely shallow lagoon. A very few shallow lagoons in some water, or lagoons may not be there at all. The most common relief, which all of us have heard, is the Great Caribbean or Red Sea reefs. Great Caribbean reefs or Red Sea reefs. Coming back to the distribution pattern of these corals, most of the corals are found in the South Pacific and Indian Ocean islands. But now the corals are facing the danger of being extinction because a lot of works are going on in the coastal region, either agriculture, pollution is also increasing, or lot of human activities result in the sedimentation. Once it is sedimented, then preservation takes place. So this is about the fringing reefs, very close. This Then the atolls. These are large ring-shaped reefs, which you can see. It looks like a well in the ocean, surrounded a central lagoon. These atolls, which are also one type of corals, uh, they are most of the time found away from large land masses. Usually, they are circular or horseshoe shaped. Even the part of these atolls may protrude above the surface, forming thus making visible as well. So that is the atolls. Most common in the Indo-Pacific regions, there are 300 plus corals. In Caribbean Sea, where they are rare, their number may be hovering between uh, 10 to 15. But here you can see these corals can extend even up to hundreds of miles in diameter. Even the central lagoon itself may be several thousand square miles. After studying these three main type of reefs, there are two more types. One is the patch reef. Patch reef is found within the lagoon or other reefs. Within the lagoon or other reefs, you can see patch reefs. They are mostly small and isolated outcrops of corals. Most of the time, they have been surrounded by sand and other sea grasses. It also produces or provides shelter and food for many species of animals and fish. That's the patch reef. Then there's also one more what we call bank reef. The reefs do not show any connection between the mainland. Now the question is how these three main reefs must have been evolved. That's the atoll or it can be reefs, how they have evolved. So the Charles Darwin, he himself, when visiting the Galapagos Island and other things, he observed three main reef types. As per the Darwin's theory, fringing reefs, this one, the one which is at the top, began to grow near the shoreline, like the characteristic feature of many of the islands. They identified that it is not the uh, temperature only, there are many other factors which is ideal for the growth, especially salinity and distance from the shore also plays an important role in determining the condition for growth. Usually, what happens as a result of the fringing reef, an island like thing gradually outcrops. The corals will be able to grow at the same rate and remain in the place at the sea surface. Slowly, when the margin of this fringing reef grows for, but farther from the shore, it becomes a barrier reef. Sometimes, in a long period of time, the island disappears below the sea surface, leaving only a ring of canals surrounding it. And this is known as atoll. There are three major types: fringing reefs, barrier reefs, and the atoll. Even the Darwin's theory of this reef evolution was verified in 1950s. For the reef to form, millions of hard coral polyps are required. Reefs are excretion of calcium carbonate produced by each polyp. How these reefs are formed? Reefs are very hard because they contain the calcium carbonate. And this calcium carbonate has been extracted from each of the polyp. When new polyps are formed, the new polyps secrete the reef on the top of the older polyps. Even reef growth has three stages: massive growth, branching, or plate like. So, this is a massive shear mass growing into huge sheet or boulder formation that wants to make the bulk of the reef. Whereas in other case, the branching, it requires small area to anchor themselves, but they branch out, a tree-like condition. Or there are certain corals which are plate-like. They are called a flat expanse, which overshadow the other corals and monopolize the available light. After studying three types of these corals, we should also know little bit about their symbiotic association with zooxanthellae. This photosynthetic organism, zooxanthellae, lives in the tissues of each coral polyp, and thus it provides food to the polyp by the process of photosynthesis. Even it gives their color to the coral. Color to the this corals is because of zooxanthellae algae. So it is a very good example for mutualistic symbiotic association or relationship. So that's why the corals need sunlight to grow. Only when the sunlight is there, the zooxanthellae can prepare the food by the process of photosynthesis. Even some other organisms also contributes for the reef building. Some molluscans and echinodermates add their skeletal remains. Sometimes the grazing and boring organisms break this coral skeleton into sand powders. There are certain algae which bind the sand and form the corals. That is coralline algae. So wherever the red dots are seen, these are the regions where you expect maximum corals. Now you can see mainly they are found in the Pacific, Atlantic and Indian Ocean. But now these reefs are being destroyed because for the growth of these corals they require very clear water, not polluted, uh, well lit sunlight. Salinity should be about 36 parts per uh, what you call 36 ppt ppm actually, not ppt, parts per millimeter, requires warmer water temperature and there should not be any wave action also. There should not be any sedimentation. But now what is happening is the reefs are facing a very dangerous condition, because of the pollution. The algae they are dying, and corals are showing the coral bleaching. So for the day we will stop here, because you may be having other classes, and in the next class I will continue for one or a few minutes, and then I will go to the other. ಏನು ಕಾಣಿಸ್ತಾ ಇತ್ತಾ? ಹಲೋ, ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇತ್ತಾ, ಕಾಣಿಸ್ತಾ ಇತ್ತಾ?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. We will meet in the next class.